Welcome to my workshop. In today's video, we're going to make some coasters and other cool objects to have in your home using this awesome new material that I just discovered called Jesmonite. Jesmonite is a casting material with some really cool properties. We're going to cast it into some vacuum form molds that we're going to make, you guessed it, we might need a vacuum former. And if that sounds interesting to you, stay tuned because in this video I'm actually giving away one of these. Thanks so much for joining me. Let's get started. Alright, so I want to make three different products. I want to make this coaster that has kind of a low poly look and feel. I want to make this shallow tray that you can serve some nuts in or something like that. And I want to make this shallow bowl that you can use for, I don't know, to throw your keys in at the end of the day. So obviously now all these are 3D printed and we want to turn these relatively cheap looking 3D printed parts into really nice high quality Jesmonite parts. And we're going to do that using vacuum forming to make some vacuum formed molds that we can cast the Jesmonite into. We'll talk more about the Jesmonite in just a second. Let's talk about the vacuum forming first. Alright, this is a vacuum forming machine. This particular one is made by a company called Make. And full disclosure, they sent this to me for free. I didn't pay any money for it. And in return for using it in one of my videos, they also agreed to giving away one additional machine to one of you guys. So stay tuned to the end of the video to figure out how you can get one. So all vacuum formers work in basically the same way. They all take a sheet of plastic, in this case PETG, and they use some sort of heating element to heat up the plastic to the point where it's flexible. And then once the plastic is sufficiently flexible, it's formed around an object using vacuum. That's why it's called vacuum former. The top part here is used to heat up the plastic, and the bottom part is used to suck the hot plastic around your part. Now, this machine doesn't have a built-in compressor, so the sucking bit is done by a normal vacuum cleaner. The vacuum cleaner gets plugged into this hose in the back of the machine, and then you plug the vacuum cleaner into the back of the machine here. Okay, so we'll take our clear sheet of plastic, this is PETG, we'll place it in here, and then there's actually a tray that comes down and locks the plastic in place. And then we'll just simply raise the plastic up to the heater and it locks in place there, and now the plastic is being heated. So that gives us time to take the object that we want to vacuum for the mold of and place it in the middle here. So the power's on and I'm just waiting to see that the plastic starts to droop down a little bit. All right, you guys ready? Check this out. It never stops being cool. Okay, so now we can take our vacuum form part out of there, and you can see that the plastic is stretched all the way perfectly around it. Now to the part where we need to get our printed part out of the vacuum form plastic. And this is the part where actually it's really important to have planned this in advance. You see, vacuum forming, much like injection molding and casting, has some rules that you need to follow. And those rules are that in order to get the part out of the plastic, there can be no undercuts. An undercut would be some area where the plastic can get in underneath the part and mechanically lock it in place, keeping you from removing the part. A good way of thinking about it is that you need to be able to see all sides of the part looking top down on it. And the way I've achieved it in this model is that I've actually modeled a slight angle of just 1 degree on all sides, which will give me what is called a draft angle. That means that I should be able to remove this part without any problem. Let's have a look. That worked really well. And just like that, our mold is finished. That is definitely the quickest and easiest mold you'll ever make. All right, that was pretty easy, wasn't it? Now, not all parts are going to be this simple to make a mold of. Some geometries will require a little bit more thinking. So let's move on to our next part. These two parts are going to make up our little low poly tray. It will have these faceted sides on the inside here, which I think will look really good at the end. Now, I could have printed this part in one go, laying down like this. But since 3D printers put layer up on layer like this, we would have really visible layer lines in these shallow angles here. So flipping it up like this makes those layers less visible, and therefore the end result is going to be better. Now, we'll quickly have to glue these together. We'll do that using some wooden dowels that we'll insert into the holes that I modeled in here. We'll clamp them together, and just like that, two parts are one. Now, I could spend a ton of time trying to sand and fill this little seam in the middle here, but this stuff is printed in PLA, and PLA is super hard to sand. So instead of sanding a whole bunch of PLA, which I honestly don't want to do, I'm going to use the vacuum former, make a vacuum formed mold of this, and then make a casting. Now, that casting is still going to have that seam, but it's much easier to sand, let's say, plaster or Jesmonite than it is to sand PLA. And then once I've sanded the part that we cast perfectly smooth, I can use that part to make a new vacuum form mold that will then produce parts that don't require any sanding. So with this part, we'll actually encounter a challenge that is pretty unique to vacuum forming. And we'll encounter that challenge because of this concave surface inside of here. So all vacuum formers will usually have an area in the bottom of the machine where the air is getting sucked out, and then a grid that will distribute that air over the entire bottom surface. So when I put an object in the middle here, the air will get sucked out all the way along the edge. Problem with that being, if I cover that top entirely, there's no way of sucking out the air that is trapped on the inside here. So for that, I've actually modeled some tiny holes in the bottom here that go all the way through that will allow the air to be sucked out from underneath and sucked out of this area up top here. All right, time to vacuum form this thing. So plastic goes in, thingy goes down, locks in place, plastic goes up, model goes in there, wait until the plastic is starting to droop. All right, ready? Let's do this. Let's say that is pretty perfect. All right, that's 2 of 3 complete. And this thing should also come out without any problems because we have the same 1-degree angle on all the sides of this part. Also, a quick little tip, a little bit of air pressure with an air gun in between the part and the plastic here will usually make the part pop right out. So as you can see, the plastic copied all the imperfections from the 3D print, but that's okay. It's way easier to sand the Jesmonite that we're gonna cast in this than to try to sand this thing. On to the last part, which is this part here. Now, this part has basically the same geometry and the same challenges as the 2 other parts. But with this one, I wanted to give myself a little bit more of a challenge. More specifically, the part that I said earlier with the undercut. You see, if you look at this part from the front, you can clearly see that it has an undercut on the little lip here. And if it was to have that around the whole part, it will literally be impossible to get this piece out of the plastic once it's vacuum formed. But if you tilt the part like this, all of a sudden it doesn't have an undercut anymore. As a matter of fact, it actually has a 1-degree angle on both sides pointing outward. So actually, once we vacuum form this part, we will have to pull it out of the mold diagonally, the same direction as these 2 sides go. And that's gonna work. Here, I'll show you. So what happened here? The printed part seems to have melted from the temperature of the plastic that we formed over it, creating these little bumps. Now these bumps are literally just from the support structure inside of the printed part, so the walls weren't thick enough to withstand the heat and therefore it crumpled. Now that was a little bit of a gamble from my side. I printed this in really fine resolution and therefore it took a really long time. So I tried to save a little bit of time printing and ended up printing it too thin. Now, there's a couple of ways around this. I could just print this whole thing again, printing it with thicker walls, and it would just take longer to print. I mean, obviously it works because these are fine. But since I don't want to do that again, and I already kind of suspected that this would happen, actually before I attempted this, since I didn't want to spend a whole day printing a new one, I made an alginate mold out of this part and then cast Jesmonite into that mold, so I do already have a perfect copy of this one, but this time solid, and it won't buckle under pressure. So that's basically exactly the same thing that we're going to do with this part in just a second, but first let's do a vacuum form mold out of this one. All right, we've got our molds, it's time to do some casting. And we're going to do that with this Jesmonite powder. Now, what is this stuff that I've been talking about so much? Well, it is quite similar to plaster in many ways. The only main difference is that instead of mixing it with water, you mix it with that liquid that it comes with. And what really sets it apart from plaster is that you can get these pigments, and this stuff takes color really, really well. So you can get these really saturated colors. Everything from totally black to totally white, and basically everything in between. Whereas in the previous projects I've done with plaster, it's always kind of hard to get a really saturated color, like this planter mold I made, or even the pendant lamp, which I added a ton of pigment, but still didn't turn out really black. But with this stuff, you can actually make totally black parts. Now, there's basically 3 different things you can do with this stuff, and we're gonna try all 3. So it's kind of convenient that we made 3 molds. The first thing is that you can just mix it together, add in whatever pigment you like, and then pour it into the mold. The second one is that you mix 2 or more colors at the same time and then pour them into the mold to create this swirly effect that can look really cool. And then lastly, you can create something called terrazzo, which is when you mix in broken up pieces of the Jesmonite into a different color, and when it cures, you end up with this marbled effect throughout the whole piece. So let's get started and mix up some colors. Now we'll start off with this guy because, as we said, we need to cast this one, sand everything nice and flush, and then re-vacuum form it to make a nicer mold. So we'll just get a couple of cups, and like with everything, mixing ratios are super important. For this stuff, it's 2.5 parts of the powder to 1 part of this liquid. So we'll measure up some of this powder. So we'll pour the powder into the liquid and start mixing it up really, really well. It's nicely mixed up, but it has this boring tan color. So we're gonna add in a little bit of pigment. And it really doesn't take much, a tiny bit of yellow, and just watch how that little amount, isn't that magic? And maybe I'll add a tiny bit of red. So I've actually mixed up a little bit of extra of this stuff, which we're gonna use to make that terrazzo that I talked about earlier. And I've laid out a little bit of just tin foil on my table here, and I'm now gonna spread out and kind of distribute it into an evenly thick layer. We'll need to wait until this stuff is dry to make our terrazzo, but let's try mixing and pouring 2 different colors at the same time. So for this mold, since the bottom isn't flat, we need to create some way of holding this horizontal when we pour in the stuff. So I've just cut this lip off the edge here, and then used some double-sided tape to glue some pieces of wood on the underside of the mold. And now we have this nice and stable base that we can pour our stuff into. All right, let's mix up 2 different colors and then pour them in to create some cool swirly patterns. All right, so I'm gonna try and mix the colors into just this liquid so I have more time to make the color before I start mixing everything together. Well, that's super yellow. Let's mix in some powders. I can't wait to see how that is going to turn out. Now on to the last one, the terrazzo. So this orange stuff that we spread out earlier is now dry, and we can just peel it off the tin foil here. Now what we're going to do is just break this up into small pieces and then mix this into another batch of the Jesmonite. So I've crushed the orange up into small bits and pieces. Now let's mix up another color and then put this into that. And I think for this one, we'll go with black. We're done with 2, now on to the last one. So you remember that we took this guy, vacuum formed it, and cast it in order to get a better surface finish. Now I took this orange one out of the mold, sanded the seams nice and flush, went over the whole thing with some wet sandpaper, flattened out all the sides and the bottom, and then vacuum formed it again. And now just look at the difference. This is the mold for the first one I made, and this is the one I just made. Look at how much nicer this is. So we'll use this one to cast some more Jesmonite in it, and then once this one is dry, we'll demold all 3. So they've all hardened. I think it's time to have a look at what we made. We'll start with this one. These are so cool. Do you see why I like this material now? Just look at how cool these colors are. I really like the way that the colors are super saturated and the way that they kind of mix in these crazy patterns when you pour them like this. This one as well, with the 3 colors that I mixed when I poured in it. I also made a second one, which I poured from the same batch. And just look at how cool these things are. So these 2 are basically done. If I wanted to, I could clean up the bottom a little bit, make it totally flat and sand that a little bit. Now this thing, however, This is just black right now. It does have a really nice surface finish from the vacuum forming, but right now it's just black. And you remember, we put something in here. So we're gonna sand this. This is my little tray to wet sand stuff. So I'm gonna take this shiny surface down and I'm gonna sand it on some 120 grit wet sanding paper. Making a bit of a mess, but just look at this thing now. Isn't that so cool? On this one, I only put orange in there. I could have, of course, put a lot of different colors in and various sizes, everything from bigger than this to much smaller than this, and it would give different patterns. I'm gonna real quick sand this up to 600 grit, and then we'll have a look at all three finished products. So we're done with our products. I just quickly sanded off all the sharp edges and then gave all the parts a nice coating of this penetrating sealer made by the same company. This is stain and water resistant, and this sealer is made so that it doesn't leave a visible coating on it. That means that the surface finish kind of is this flat, non-glossy surface, which actually looks really good, especially on the parts that are flat. However, for these parts specifically, I really wish that I had a coating that gave them a more glossy finish. I think that would look really good, especially with these low angle faceted pieces here. And you can kind of see that here when I applied the sealer when it still was wet. That looks really good, how the different facets reflect light in different ways. There is actually a product that does this, I just don't have it here right now, but I'm definitely gonna get it. And when I do, I'm gonna try it out and I'll make sure to post some pictures on Instagram. So if you wanna see the results of that, make sure to follow me. I'll leave a link right below that like button. I did actually cheat a little bit on this one part and I just clear coated it. That's definitely not gonna be as durable, but it looks really good. All right, so I really hope you enjoyed watching me play around with these new materials and with my new vacuum forming machine. And like I said in the beginning, I'm actually giving away one of these. So if you wanna win one, here's how. All you gotta do to get a chance to win one of these is that you gotta be subscribed to this channel, give this video a thumbs up, and leave a comment in the comments down below. I'll pick one winner at random from the comments down below that'll take home a vacuum forming machine together with some plastic so you can get started vacuum forming right away. And the winner will be announced in about 2 weeks on MakeQ's Instagram account. I'll leave a link to that in the description below. Head over there for some great inspiration for what you can do with one of these machines and to figure out who takes one of these home. And remember, making vacuum form molds is not the only thing a machine like this can do. You can make everything from the molds to the products itself. There's actually a surprising amount of products that you're in contact with every day that are vacuum formed. I'm thinking of making a video that goes a little bit more in-depth into vacuum forming, trying out a bunch of different things. I actually also own a bigger vacuum forming machine, so we can have a look at that as well. If that's something that you'd be into, please let me know down in the comments. Also, don't forget to check out my new merchandise store. I've got everything from t-shirts to hoodies and sweaters, and depending on when you're watching this, limited edition 100,000 followers t-shirts that will only be available until the day I pass 110,000 followers, and after that, they're gone forever. So make sure you're quick and go check it out. Link in the description below. All right, so that pretty much sums up this video. Remember, if you want to win one of these, all you gotta do is be subscribed to the channel, give this video a thumbs up, and leave a comment down below. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye bye!